All right, and we're back for another episode of We Good. It's the virtual town hall series by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Wright with Insight News, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and say a special thank you to the sponsors who make this town hall possible, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota, as well as our partner organizations, which are North Point, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, the Minnesota Spokesman Reporter, and Minnesota Community Care. In today's conversation, we are focused on corporate responsibility in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an uprising. And joined with me today, I have Adrienne Thornton, who is our nurse and infection preventionist at Children's Minnesota. Adrienne, thank you for being here as always. Super appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Super appreciate you. Also joining us is James Momon, who is the Global Inclusion Executive and HR Leader for General Mills. Welcome, James. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is my boss, Mr. McFarland, Mr. Al McFarland, who is the CEO at McFarland Media Interest Incorporated, as well as Insight News. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Mr. Jesse Ross, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consultant, Executive Coach, as well as international speaker. You may know him from the Morning Minute podcast. Welcome, Jesse, to the Town Hall.
Thank you very much.
And also joining us is my former boss, actually. It's all family on this call today, Marnita Schroedl, who is the CEO and founder of Marnita's Table. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are so glad that all of you are here and can join us for this important conversation. We are finally in the fall months. I know it's starting to feel like fall a little bit. But one thing is for certain, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So we always want to ground ourselves and make sure that we're clear on what exactly is happening as it relates to COVID-19. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Adrienne Thornton. Adrienne, yesterday was the first day of school for a lot of our young people. Some of them are already in school. And there were a lot of concerns about COVID and whether or not there should be a hybrid model, virtual, etc. How can we as parents maintain our young people's safety as well as our own safety now that some of our children are going to be interacting with other people?
You know, we always go back to the 3 W's. Wear your mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. There have been multiple studies published that show doing those 3 things stops the transmission, or at the very least slows the transmission of COVID-19. And so if we can get everyone on board and everyone doing the same thing, even though the kids are going back to school, we can protect them, we can protect our families. And the hard part with going back to school is the children have been home in quarantine since March. They miss the social aspect of being at school. And, you know, the younger kids and the older kids, I think, are going to be the 2 hardest groups to get them to keep their masks on and to get them to keep their social distance, because they're so excited to be back with their friends and their teachers and to be out of the house. And so we just have to remind them on a daily basis how important it is, you know, if you have on your mask, quick hug, you know, and then get your distance back. But we can't have them not wearing masks and being close to each other for extended amounts of time, because we still have a fair amount of asymptomatic transmission of the virus from person to person. And so, you know, I'm glad they're going back to school. I'm glad that schools have figured out a way to bring the kids back safely, whether it's through a hybrid situation or the distance learning with, you know, 1 or 2 days where kids can come and socialize. But we do have to continue to impress upon them the importance of the 3 W's. Wear your mask at all times, wash your hands frequently, and watch your distance. And even if you have on a mask, you still need to maintain that 6 feet of distance, because the mask it's not going to give you full protection. It protects you from a lot of the transmission of the organism, but it's the mask with the social distancing that really helps to stop the transmission of COVID. So we just need to keep reminding our kids of that and really support the staff, and I'm doing that. You know, my daughter goes to Iowa State, and her first week back, she sent me all these pictures of her college mates partying at bars, and no one had on a mask. There was no social distance. They were, you know, crammed into a bar together. And Iowa State then instituted a policy that said, you know, if we determine that you have gone out of the school and you have been congregating without following the guidelines, then there will be consequences. And the unfortunate, you know, reaction from parents was to say, oh, well, our children need their freedom. You know, they're in college, they're young, let them live. Well, in letting them live, we are potentially putting a death sentence on others, because the highest number of cases of COVID continue to be in our 18 to 20-year-olds and 20 to 30, and highest rate of death continues to be our 70, our 80, our 90-year-olds, and some of our 60-year-olds. And so it's wonderful that you want your children to have their freedom and to live their life and to be social, but people need to understand that in living their freedom, they are putting death sentences on other people, and that is not okay, it's not right, and it's not fair. This is our new normal. It is not going to change anytime soon, and if we want it to change, we have to follow the guidelines, and we have to do the right thing, which is to follow the 3 W's.
Well, it's interesting that you say that it's our new normal, because what I'm seeing in other countries is that they seem to be mitigating the transmission of COVID a lot better than what the U.S. appears to do. And I saw something on the internet the other day that said other countries are working to eliminate the coronavirus, and the United States is just saying this is going to be our new normal. Do you feel like, based on the rates of transmission that the U.S. is seeing, that this is just going to be something that's here to stay? Like, have we passed the point of no return, or is it possible that there will be a time when we don't have to be fearful of COVID exposure?
I think there's a time coming. When that comes, it's very dependent on when the vaccine will be ready and effective. It's not going to be soon. I don't foresee that happening this year. Even if we have a vaccine by the end of the year, we won't have enough of it to go around to everyone. And I doubt that we'll have an effective vaccine that's been through all of the different testing guidelines to have it ready by the end of the year. So eventually we will get to that point, but you have to keep in mind, other countries that have less COVID than we do, they follow the guidelines early and consistently. They consistently had their citizens wearing masks. Their citizens weren't as adamant about not wearing masks. They were more fearful of the virus, and therefore they complied more. And so in the countries where you're seeing less COVID, it is because they were quarantined perhaps longer or perhaps better, but also their citizens took it as their responsibility to follow the 3 W's to stop the transmission. And so that is very important for people to realize. Yes, there are countries that have less virus, but there are also those are countries that have been more compliant. Now, the flip side of that is, depending on which country you're looking at, there is a lot of underreporting. And so whereas the U.S., we have a really good infrastructure for reporting these cases, we're very transparent about it. Every country is not like that. All countries don't have the infrastructure we have to track and report these cases. And many countries don't want to report their cases for fear of backlash for having so many cases. So keep that in mind as well. There may be more cases than are being reported in other countries. But oftentimes, a lot of those countries, they just have better compliance. But also, if the country is smaller, for instance, New Zealand had really good success, but their population is very close to the size of Minneapolis. So if your country is the size of Minneapolis, it's much easier to maintain structure and to get compliance with the guidelines. And so there are a lot of things that go into reporting COVID, how it's transmitted, and how countries are managing it. And so it's a little hard to say just a blanket statement, all these countries have eliminated COVID, because even in New Zealand, they were reporting that they had 0 cases for several weeks, and then they had a small cluster to appear. And so there's always the possibility of transmission, especially when people don't follow the guidelines in the 3W.
Okay, that's important context, because it definitely feels like as Americans, we are behind the 8 ball in a variety of ways, right? Not just as it relates to COVID-19, but that seems to be the glaring thing because we're seeing reports on numbers and comparing it. But when we talk about America being behind the 8 ball, where we're working in multiple pandemics, and so I want to ask everyone else, we'll get to the response to the murder of George Floyd in just a moment, but how as corporations or organizations or entrepreneurs were you impacted by COVID, and how did you respond to COVID? So with that, I'll start with Jesse.
You're going to go to the corporations first. So I will say the way that I was impacted by COVID was probably similar to other small businesses where most of my business is built around training and development, working with people, being able to interact and engage. And of course, we can't do that anymore. I also have 5 kids. So Adrienne, I appreciate you sharing that. We've been sharing the W's. Every time I say 5, people be like, whoa. So I saw that. But it put a damper on pretty much we're a social family to some degree. And so you have, business wise, I wasn't able to travel, wasn't able to gather people, wasn't able to, get people together. And then just socially us being literally staying at home was one of the things that we weren't prepared for, but definitely I think we adjusted well. I think on a business side, if I'm being completely transparent, I remember seeing, watching the news, paying attention. And then I remember having maybe an email come through saying, hey, we got to cancel due to, the health regulations. And you're like, okay. And then another email came in later that day. And then I probably, for the next 7 days, I probably got a total of 20 to 40 different emails saying we had to change, we had to cancel, we had to postpone. And I lost about somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000 in, potential revenue for the year. And we're still in the year. And so for me, it was like, oh, this is real. And I don't know if I'm gonna be able, to necessarily recover for that. I will say as things have started opening up, some of those businesses have definitely kind of reached back out. We've made some shifts and been able to do virtual events. But I think for the most part, just like everybody else, I got hit hard. I know a lot of small business owners got hit hard. And if you weren't prepared for it, I know a lot of business owners who are, especially Black business owners, who still haven't recovered, who are trying to figure out how do we do that? How do we make it out? On top of, you have a family, you have responsibilities, you have different, obligations or commitments. And so for me, it was one of those things where, I had to be ready, and I'm still trying to make my way through. I think fortunately, having a background where I've been able to just, I don't have any employees, it's just myself. And so I didn't need to flex as much or, lay off people as other companies or organizations have had to, but definitely still feeling the effects. And then watching not even just the business side of that, but the emotional side of people still going through and trying to figure out how do we navigate this new world.
For sure. Well, I'm appreciative of you being here after losing that much revenue. I know your time becomes even more precious. So we most definitely appreciate it, and hope that you'll be able to continue to recover. I want to go ahead and ask the person representing the larger corporation, Mr. James Momon, how has your company been impacted by COVID-19?
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. So, I think for us, it's been challenging, but probably in different ways than Jesse obviously described. I think for us, being in the food industry, we've got a responsibility to produce food at this time. As you guys recall, when this first happened, grocery stores were being flooded by consumers trying to load up on food product. And so for us, the pressure to produce and manufacture food, get it to the customers, making sure consumers can actually purchase it, that was our primary focus for the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic, but trying to do that in a safe way. So obviously we've got office personnel who could easily work from home, and we did that shortly after March. And so most of our office staff has been working remotely on their laptops for the last several months. But for our plant personnel, they've got to go to the plant. They've got to make sure that we're producing those cases to get to our consumers. And so how do we do that as safely as possible, taking all the guidance we can from our medical professionals, making sure that we take care of them as best we can if they do get sick, making sure that we've got support to manage families and homes that frankly have two parents who are trying to go to work and provide but don't have childcare. How do we support those families? So again, it created a lot of complexities, not necessarily on the business front, because again, I think for us, our business was an essential need, and so we were navigating that. But how do you make sure you can actually deliver what your consumer needs and do it in a safe way on behalf of your employees? I would say the other piece for a lot of our office personnel who are at home, it's how do you help them manage the mental health aspects of this. We've been in this for almost 6 months now, and I think people are slowly hitting their fraying points. And so how do we provide folks with the mental health resources that they need to get through this, especially as kids go back to school? That adds a whole nother level of complexity. And so we've really just focused on care for our employees. That's been our primary focus, is care and safety. And then obviously delivering what our consumers need. So it's been a tough and tricky balance, but one that I think we've tried to manage pretty well so far.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes a difference when society looks at what it is that you're producing as being essential to their survival, even in this moment. I would imagine that a lot of people look at the news as also being an essential business. Mr. McFarland, has that been the response that you've received? And how do you view it? How has COVID impacted your work?
Thanks for the question. The impact of COVID-19, I think, is amplified by the impact of the George Floyd incident here in Minnesota. Both of them reveal systemic challenges and systemic barriers to development in our community and in communities of color. COVID-19 pulled the cover off of the storied and pervasive health inequities, health disparities. We've been using the language about health disparities. We've been using the language about inclusion and diversity, but in a way that, in my view, was not genuine, authentic, or deep enough to really compel action that was powerful and truly responsive to the challenges that we're facing now. COVID-19 made it personal and real for everybody in the country, certainly for everybody on the planet. The threat of exposure, of sickness, of death is real and personal. And we discovered by this happening that our communities, in particular, Black and Brown communities, had more risk factors because of what they were calling underlying symptoms or other conditions like heart disease or diabetes or hypertension, things that are pervasive in our cultural communities put us at greater risk. So it forced the entire country to look differently at what we have done and what we have not done to resolve this set of inequities that we are now admitting are structural, and some would say somewhat intentional. Now we have to address that. Then you add to that that pandemic and to the clarifying power, the undeniable truth of having to look at the daily count of casualties, of infections, and the daily count of deaths, both in this country and around the world, and also in our state. And you look at that, and then you add to that the pressure that comes from the social unrest associated with seeing the murder of George Floyd in South Minneapolis. I say that both the George Floyd incident and the COVID-19 pandemic both conspire to create a perfect storm, and they make Minneapolis 38th and Chicago, 39th and Chicago in particular, ground zero of a necessary transformation, not only in this community and this society, but globally. I think where we are right now is a place where we are forced to speak a new truth and to speak with conviction and authority about what ails us and our ability and our responsibility, our obligation, our duty to be part of the solution side of this pandemic equation. We've been relegated to the margins. Our pain was not taken seriously by culture at large. Our failures were laid at our own feet and our own doing, but not at the structures that prevented the pursuit of opportunity and complete full cultural lives for our entire community. But now we are able to look at two things. One, that this structural set of barriers to our advancement and to the recognition of our full humanity is out in the open. And we have to have the courage to talk about it to each other and to the world. And it means specifically that Black people have to be willing to talk to white people about it and tell them what's on our mind. You add to that the pressure created by the George Floyd incident. It says to the world what we have been saying to ourselves for hundreds of years, that we have been and we remain under siege. And the country and companies refuse to acknowledge that this was real to us, or that they had anything to do with it, that if it happened, it was somebody over there and not us. And I think that the lesson from George Floyd in part is a reminder that to us, to start with, that Black lives do matter, that our lives matter, and that we have to have the courage to speak our truth and to insist on, to organize, to communicate that change is imminent and change is necessary and inevitable, and that we will be the stewards of that change. And that change will be political, cultural, in the health arena, in the political arena. All of that together means we're going to create a new narrative for our nation and for the world. And it's a narrative in which we win, our people win. What does that mean, Al McFarland? If you're saying we win, does that mean there's a loser? No. It's redefining everything. Winning for us doesn't mean somebody else has to lose. When I say we win, I can mean that we humans all win. How do we approach life differently? And I think that's what's on the table right now. Pardon me for going long-winded, but that's what I do.
Oh, you said all the right things. I feel like we were all over here taking notes and just soaking it up. That was very well said. And you made a really great point about Black people being willing to talk to white people about our experiences and white people being willing to listen, right? And to not always try to be the authors of other people's experience. And that's been the value of this town hall. That's been the value of Insight News, is capturing the Black experience. Somebody who's done a phenomenal job at getting Black people and white people and people from all backgrounds together is Marnita. It's the whole basis of Marnita's table. So Marnita, please tell me how you have been able to get people to connect in such a way, and then I'll ask you about COVID's impact.
Wow. Well, so actually I can put that all together in one pretty package. this year has been extraordinary on so many levels. And it really, it brought into stark relief, as many of our speakers have already said, just how many Black and brown people are on the edge or on the margins in terms of having access to healthcare or access to basic needs. And the table was founded in 2005, and we're 15 years old, and we have gone all over the state, and we are now national. And we've asked people repeatedly what they wanted, like what makes a happy community, what make neighbors. And people continually say they need access to living wage jobs, they need access to healthcare, they need access to good schools. And that's what will help them thrive. And over our institutions say, we want to do a listening session, and we're going to bring these people into a room, and then we actually aren't going to make any change, right? The action is just bringing people into the room. And Black and brown people are tired of that, first of all. They're tired of that game of, we don't know what the problem is. And Al, of course, it's completely intentional. From the freeways that cut our neighborhoods in two and cut us off and cut us out and didn't send transportation in, to denying us access, all of that was intentional. My body being evidence of a felony until I was 6 years old in 17 states was so that white people didn't see me as human, right? Didn't see me as an equal. This was not by accident. And so how do you get out of that? What intention takes you away from that? So the table's now 15 years old, and we've brought over 80,000 people together across difference. And sometimes we get hired by systems folks to do it, and then they bury the report. And we've discovered that often women of color go unbury that report. And in one case, Marika Pfefferkorn, for instance, when we did work in Ramsey County, and they took our entire report and decided that what they needed was to have a joint powers board sharing information about students who were going to fall through the cracks with the police. And that's not what people said in the rooms, what they wanted done. Marika and others who had been in that room stood up and said, no, that's not what was said in the room. And then the system came back and said, oh, we should do more listening sessions. And Marika and others said, no, the listening sessions weren't the problem. You aren't listening to us. And then magic happened. 17 women took the report and went and found their own funding from other sources to do what the community of color said they wanted done. And I'm seeing that happen more. And that desire to say, I don't want the dominant culture to be the author of my community anymore, that you have not been a reliable, trustworthy partner. And so that has been one aspect. But when COVID hit, it was really interesting. We were going around the country for 17 philanthropies. That's what they like to call foundations now, philanthropies. Just, I laugh at that because it's like, changing the name, social entrepreneurship is gone. Now we're philanthropies. And in some ways it strikes me as, going through strategic process and talking about what you're going to be called instead of actually getting work done. And they were looking at what did it mean to build a healthy community? And they were looking all over the country, and they engaged us to bring people of color into the room, IBPOC into the room. And our very first event our second event our first was in Seattle in October of last year. And our second event for them was supposed to be on March 10th in Fort Bend, Texas. And it got canceled when they got 4 cases in Fort Bend. And on the following Monday, the state of Minnesota shut down. And I pulled my team together that morning, and we have a staff of 12 now. 10 of them are IBPOC. And we said, okay, we are essentially an event company. That's going away. And we talked about how fast could we go digital. And my team said, well, 4 to 6 weeks. And I said, great, our first event will be on Friday at 11 a.m. And they all kind of looked at me like I was crazy. We've now had more than 5,000 people to the table digitally. In fact, we always called ourselves intentional social interaction. We now have DISIs, digital intentional social interactions. We've been to Matsu, Alaska, San Diego. Our event in San Diego had over 330 people on grid with 110 in grid, meaning there were 110 actual attendees, but then they had their families. We served 330 meals over 100 miles across distance using all caterers of color and drivers of color. In the next 2 weeks, we put $25,000 back into the community for the people who we'd always used, who wouldn't be able to make money, the healers who were at Healing from Trauma. And so we wanted to make sure that the people of color we've been hiring and working with who couldn't get unemployment. I have to say this to all you business owners out there. In 2009, Marnita's Table started a relationship with Sunrise Banks. And we got a little loan from them to get a credit line going so that we had some credit line. That credit line is now $100,000. We haven't had to use it for 3 years. And at 3 o'clock the day that PPP loans went in, we were already submitted. And it did give us the runway to keep my entire staff. I added 2 new staff members to the team. One of whom is pregnant now, and we have the honor of giving her a 3-month leave of absence so she can care for her child. We believe that everything we touch has to be equitable. So we pay our workers a living wage, we model what we want, and we've actually gone back and added language into all of our contracts explaining the dominant culture clients, as opposed to the community or anybody else, are the most high maintenance, low value clients to us. Even though they might pay us more, they're more interested in paint. They're not always interested in making systemic change. Our events in Minneapolis for these 17 philanthropies were literally the week of the George Floyd uprisings. The first week, we had to cancel all of our events. We had about $12,000 worth of food we had already arranged to purchase through caterers of color in the Twin Cities. And so our team went out every day on the streets and gave away that food to people who were cleaning up the streets in the morning. And so we did that for a period of time. So we tried to show up in community as a partner in community, and kept the lights on and everything going. And so now we've been to North Carolina, Wichita, Kansas, New Hampshire, and we'll be in Connecticut on Tuesday night. And people have never needed to come together more, but it has to be authentic, and it cannot always be centered on white voices and needs. It can't always, sometimes I tell my story and somebody either says to me, oh, you want to be a victim, or they say, you're making me feel bad because you're telling me how bad, and I keep saying, you keep talking about the Black crime rate, most of the things that white people did to Black and brown people, they did under cover of law. Like, it must be nice to be able to make the laws such that when you kill somebody, it's not murder. That until we saw the video of Ahmaud Marbury or of Elijah McClain, none of that was considered a crime, right? Like, none of those things and it's not supposed to impact us. And then on a final note, to quote Sam Nadelli, he was the one who really got me thinking about wage theft, and that more than $15 billion a year is stolen from low wage workers. And nobody says those people shouldn't live in the neighborhoods. Nobody says those people aren't nice citizens and we shouldn't be kind to them. So I'm feeling feisty today, Brittany, if you couldn't tell. I'm feeling a little bit spicy.
I think that's every day. I think it's every day, but that's how you created the table, is because you saw something was wrong long before people were talking about it, long before it was the sexy thing for corporations to do. And you said, we need people to be communicating, and there are voices that are getting left from the table and left out of the conversation who matter and who we need to center and uplift and connect. And so that's been your work, and you brought up a really good point about wage theft, and shout out to Sam and Deli as well for bringing that up, because we're here today talking about corporate response to COVID-19 and to the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that's been taking place not just in 2020, really, it's been for the past 400 years, but everything that's happened up until this point has led to this moment that we're in right now. And so all of a sudden, May, was it 26, George Floyd's life is taken from us. We see it happen in an 8-minute, 46-second video, and everyone responds. All these corporations suddenly respond as if we haven't been seeing and knowing and saying and screaming for generations that we can't breathe. We've been saying this. We've been witnessing police brutality on social media, on the news, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the culmination of the pandemic on top, or if this just happened to be the moment. I've had people say, you know what, George Floyd was a powerful man in the spirit realm, and that's why he changed the world. Whatever the reason is, what we know is that people responded differently when George Floyd's life was taken from him. I want to ask Mr. Momon, how has your corporation responded to the murder of George Floyd, and why, as a person of color, why do you think that response was the way it was?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're asking the right question. You know, it's sad, as Black folks, sometimes we can become numb to these videos, and frankly, at times, I personally can't watch them. There was another one in Rochester, and Rochester, New York. And so again, I think you know, it's interesting, your question around what struck a chord with so many people in George Floyd. And obviously, this was in our hometown, in our backyard, so it's gonna the home of our corporate headquarters and where we were founded. So it's obviously gonna strike a different chord. But you know, I think it's what you said. It's those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that you can watch in full display. And I think our majority colleagues experience that differently than they have in other videos. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and you know, we had instances where 12-year-old boy is shot by a police officer in under 3 seconds playing with a toy gun. Why that doesn't strike a chord with the nation, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but that feels pretty egregious to me. But George Floyd really struck a chord with the nation and with the world. And you know, my goal ever since this has happened is to not let this moment go to waste. We've got a tremendous opportunity here. I think Marnita mentioned there are folks who are more aware and awake and willing to hear the truth now. And I think probably 6 months ago, they would have ignored or tried to deflect a lot of these issues. And I think people are more willing to listen, learn, and understand. And frankly, I just don't want to lose and miss the opportunity to drive real and lasting change. And again, General Mills can't fix all these issues. We're one company. But I do think the corporate community in the Twin Cities has a responsibility to step up to the plate and use both our resources, our voice, our influence to really drive change with the folks who do make policy, who do set legislation, who do have impacts on the communities that are living with the largest disparities, not only in this state, but in this country. So again, I think there is a new and renewed sense of responsibility and action. I think, Al, you mentioned it, you know, talk is cheap. We've done a lot of talking, and talk is important, but talk has, to some degree, diminishing returns. We've got to actually do stuff. And so one of the things that General Mills has been a part of is, you know, helping create, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, Minnesota Corporate and Community Coalition, which is really just, you know, bringing together some of the largest employers who, after the George Floyd moment, were looking for ways to meaningfully act. And instead of 120 companies going off in 120 different directions, we said, look, we might as well sit down, coalesce resources, have discussion and dialogue to really see if there's a way to leverage the scale of all these companies to have a meaningful impact on specifically Black communities, but more broadly our BIPOC communities. And so, again, I think I can't answer your question, Brittany, on why this moment was different. But I am not going to let this moment go to waste. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that when we look back a year from now, things have changed. One of the things, a number that I always was struck by, General Mills, we've contributed, I think it's $20 million to equity issues in the state in the last 5 years. And if I think about the impact that $20 million has had, these disparities still exist. In some cases, they're worse. And so, again, is it a money problem? Is it a resource problem? Is it an influence problem? Is it a leadership problem? The answer is yes, it's all the above. And so, again, I would hate to look back a year from now and see us in the same spot and on the same trajectory. So again, to me, it's all about driving meaningful change. And again, one company's not going to fix it, but we want to be a part of the solution.
Can I address something, Brittany? It's interesting. One of the things that I've really observed is we're getting calls from everywhere, right, as this happened. And we were supposed to be over the Thames River with 3,000 people coming together as part of our Building Bridges, Breaking Bread series this summer. And we've been working with Andrea Jenkins in the 8th Ward. We've done 3 years of Building Bridges, Breaking Bread over the 35W bridge to highlight the disparities often on the different sides of freeways from the Federal Highway Project. But one of my observations is that some of the ways that we try and cure this is by saying, well, we need more mentors. Like we need to mentor more young people of color. And we've been doing some of those things for a long time. And I really do feel that at some point, a huge issue is the fact that I once pointed out to somebody, when I started the table because people kept saying they couldn't get young people to the table and they couldn't get people of color to the table. Brittany, ever been to my table? Are there young people at my table? Are there people of color there?
Always. That's who's leading.
That's it, right. And in the majority normally, right? It's not like one or two people. It's not tokenism. It's literally, and I've done it consistently for 15 years. But in fact, in those 15 years, no foundation or corporation ever came and pulled us entirely in-house, knowing that I was gifted at this, right? Oh, we want to do community engagement. But they would strip out my intellectual property. They would come and copy what I did. But at no point, even though I'd been a senior VP in communications at a publicly traded company, at no point did they come and say, you should be a senior executive in our organization, and we are going to give you an area. And Hubert Joly, who was the former CEO of Best Buy, who has been, he came over and so celebrated when you were Miss Black Minnesota at your party. He once said to me, he said, Marnita, I didn't believe it was racism, but I have to tell you, I have recommended you so many times, and I developed 2 women in this city that I spent a lot of effort to develop. One is Corey Berry, and she is now the CEO of Best Buy, and the other was me. And at some point he realized that it wasn't getting traction, and it had nothing to do with my excellence or even he who had this big platform and was a good-looking rich white guy couldn't. And so some of it is so entrenched that, that we keep acting as though the problem is we are underdeveloped and we need to be developed more. When in fact is the reason we needed affirmative action wasn't because Black and brown people were stupid. It was because white people were racist, right? And at some point, people have to set that aside. And I'm seeing more people do it. I actually am. I was in LA in 1962 with the Rodney King riots. That's where I lived in I was born in 62, in 92. I'm actually hearing white people say, property is not as important as lives. Did you see those videos? Do you understand? I'm hearing it for the very first time. So I have some hope, but it can't be, we can't get the results by doing the same stuff. So do we need good schools? Yes, because young people need investment of every color. But at some point, people just have to lay it down and stop, saying, well, And some of it is outside our control, which is why often people like Jesse and me go form our own companies, because we aren't acknowledged, right? Inside a bigger institution, or Adrienne, like we end up, we do Al. Yet Al, why hasn't a major publication come and offered? And maybe we wouldn't sell it, but I'm not always seeing some of the key innovators in our community actually get that investment. And that's the thing that's almost outside of our control to turn.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There are plenty of people who are doing the work. You're one of them. Jesse is another one. You have committed your entire companies and built your companies around the idea of equity, of inclusion, of eliminating racism, of addressing the issues head on. And yet it's those same people in community that are always overworked, underpaid, overlooked, constantly trying to figure out how to sustain their businesses. Those are the businesses that are impacted the hardest when we have moments like a pandemic or some other thing that happens and kind of shakes us all. And for whatever reason, these larger corporations, will put out, they'll send an email saying that we support Black lives and Black Lives Matter. But when you go into their boardrooms and when you look at their line items for their budget, it doesn't actually appear as if they believe Black Lives Matter. It really just looks like it's become the new slogan or hashtag that they can use as like a stamp to say, I'm an ally and therefore don't boycott and loot my business, or therefore make sure you buy more of my product, therefore I want to profit off of you more. And I'm really curious for Jesse, whose work is in going into these corporations and doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is what we're seeing right now in this pivot and in this moment of awakening, does it seem genuine to you? Do you feel like we as a community can actually trust that after the Jesse Rosses and the Marnitas of the world go into these organizations and give them the training and give them the tools, that their organizations will actually be a safe place for people of color to work and exist in?
It's one of my favorite questions. So I'll answer it this way. I think that there are definitely some very well-intentioned and quality leaders in these corporate companies who are Black and brown and who are not, our white counterparts, who do mean well and don't know how to do it, but want to figure it out. I also have seen and continue to see people who really want to throw money at the problem still in today's culture, who want to throw money at the problem and who will run to, hey, we should put out a statement, will run to, we should create a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy or strategic plan or whatever you want to call it, but will, in that same vein, will turn their eye and turn their shoulder at their staff that are, for lack of better terms, slaving to make sure that they make money, who are putting in hours and who are coming to work exhausted and drained and still having to figure out how to make it work because that is their, profession. And so I think that there's a mix. What I have been fortunate to do, and I just admire people like James who, in essence, there's some aspect of, being in that corporate company and having to drink the Kool-Aid, right? But not losing yourself and not losing your identity and being able to say, hey, here are my values, here is what I stand for, and here's the way that I'm going to make change in my proximity. And I know tons of Black and brown professionals and white professionals who are trying to do that. I think it's really big. It's a big problem. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who is white who called me yesterday. And in my head, I'm like, now we're friends. Now, I don't know who that person was talking to, but we're friends. And I haven't heard anything this entire time. And maybe there's a lot, on their plate. But I think that there has to be that intentionality around it. What I try to tell people, and I took this and kind of modified it from another friend of mine, it's like thinking about three things. So my three core values are integrity, transparency, and relationships. It's just how I was raised. My mom I grew up in North Minneapolis. She worked for the Urban League. Al, I've been reading your papers since I could learn how to read. And so for me, the integrity piece is I want to be a person who, when I'm here on this call, when I'm at a foundation, when I'm in community, when I'm with family, I'm the same person. I like what I say, like who I am and what I say, it's what you get. It is what it is. The transparency is like, I don't really do fluff. I know we live in this thing called Minnesota Nice, but my parents are from the South. I got a little bit different. I don't really do that. But relationships. And I think that when you have relationships with people, no matter where and what industry they serve in, you can kind of seek out whether people are being intentional and deliberate, and you can call them out on whether they should be doing something different or being, and so I've loved watching Marnita do that. And I've been in so many of your meetings. I love it. To be able to call people out on their stuff, but also bring people to something like a table, in a room, in a conversation, to welcome them and say, you know what, we all got to do our part. And so to answer your question, Brittany, I sometimes there are companies out here, it is for show. You know, I won't call any companies out. It's not my job, but I do. We know people who do stuff for show, and that's just kind of the culture that we live in. We're in a different time. And so I think the proof will be in the pudding. What I do know is that there are plenty of studies, if people would just pay attention, that show if corporate companies don't pay attention to this problem and don't act on it, your company will not be around for like it's beneficial to figure out how to be involved, not just for the brand, but like for your employees and for the community. And I think there are people who know that. And I think there are tons of companies that are actually working to do that. And I would like to just focus more on those than the people who aren't.
For sure. I think maybe if we don't make a list of all the bad ones, maybe we should at least start a list of the good ones. Like who is demonstrating true allyship? Like whose bottom line reflects that they actually value their Black employees? Like who can actually say that their Black employees feel safe while in that corporate space, or that their, you know, Black employees aren't the quote unquote minority of the staff, right? That there are other people in leadership positions who look like them, and not just those in entry level positions who are underpaid, right? All of those things matter. But I do want to raise one thing to the surface. We've been talking a lot, and we even branded this conversation about the corporate response to the murder of George Floyd. But as we mentioned, this issue started well beyond George Floyd. And it's not just George Floyd who we're focusing on in this moment. It's the Breonna Taylors of the world. It's the Sandra Blands of the world. There are Black women that are also being disenfranchised, and that are even in the conversation about race and about police brutality and about corporate responsibility, we're getting left out of the conversation. When we talk about equity as it relates to wage, you know, there's the disenfranchisement of Blackness, and then there's the disenfranchisement of being a woman, right? So it's we've got two strikes against us in that space. And so I want to ask Ms. Adrienne Thornton, as someone who also works within a larger institution, what is it that your corporation either has done or can be doing so that you as a Black woman feel like your experience is valued, and that it can continue to be a safe place, or can become a safe place for other Black women?
Yeah, so, you know, I'm very fortunate and blessed to be working at Children's. Our CEO, he has been a breath of fresh air. When he first came, I was kind of on the fence because I've been there 20 years. I've seen CEOs come and go. I've seen them talk the talk but not walk the talk. And this CEO walks the talk, and he is not playing. And he has difficult conversations with the organization often. And that's been going on before, you know, the civil unrest and the pandemic. These have been conversations that he's been bringing forward since he took over as CEO, which has made it much more comfortable for people like me who have been there and seen how things don't happen as they should. I am much more comfortable to speak out. And so after George Floyd's murder, you know, the organization addressed it and gave Black employees the opportunity to say what was on their mind. We had listening sessions. where our employees of color were all invited to give their input on our relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department. And actually, those conversations are continuing. I actually have a meeting later on tomorrow to further discuss that with our Black employees. And it's not just Black employees who sit in an office like I do. We've included people in our Environmental Services Department, in our Facilities Department, some of our health unit coordinators. And so we want to make sure that we represent all of our Black employees to the best of our ability. Also, we have town halls every few weeks just to kind of update all employees on the state of the hospital. And when George Floyd was murdered, they didn't shy away from bringing that up and having a conversation about it, acknowledging how wrong it was and giving people the opportunity to, say what was on their mind. We also have virtual sessions with a therapist for our Black employees so that they're able to talk to someone that can help them work through the emotions that they're dealing with the social unrest on top of the pandemic, on top of, all of the things that are happening at the hospital. And so what it's done for me is I'm from the South. I was born and raised in Georgia, but I was raised by a very, I love my mom, God rest her soul, but she was very much a team player. And you act a certain way and you talk a certain way and you don't want to insult people. And so in my family, she and my sister labeled me the militant one, which is crazy because I'm not militant. I've just always spoken my mind. But as I got older and was admonished more by my mother, I became very quiet. And as a result of my hospital and my organization supporting me and encouraging me to speak out, I am now more comfortable to speak out. So my director in our first team meeting after the George Floyd murder very intentionally said, well, we have to discuss it. I want you all to, say what's on your mind. How are you feeling? How are you dealing with this? And Adrienne, especially you, because she knows I have, Black sons and nephews. And so encouraging me to speak my truth, but also giving me that platform. And so then when I attended other meetings throughout the day where they didn't even mention it, I felt very comfortable in saying, well, we're not going to end this meeting without at least acknowledging that I am the only Black person in this meeting, and this is what I'm dealing with, and I just need you all to know that. And so I couldn't do that if I didn't work at an employer that not only supported me in what I want and need to do, but encouraged me to do it. They support me in doing the town hall every 2 weeks, which to me is huge because it's not a small task to do the town hall. And, we are dealing with restraint resources. And as an infection preventionist, of course, I have not been furloughed. Thank you, Jesus. But, we're dealing with having to furlough employees and trying to rejigger our entire organization because of the impact of COVID. And so for them to not only allow me to do this, but to support me and encourage me and to provide whatever I need to be able to do this is huge because, one, it means I won't be leaving the organization anytime soon, but it allows me to continue to be there and mentor other employees, but also bring issues that other employees are dealing with to the forefront to people who are actually listening, really listening, and able to make changes within the organization that I myself can't make. So it's been really eye-opening. It's been really great to be able to have those conversations and to perhaps shine a light on other issues within our organization that I knew was there and other Black employees knew were there, but we weren't able to talk about it, and now we are. And so it's been a wonderful change in how we deal with race and racial issues, and I'm really excited for what we have in store going forward in terms of building race relations within our organization and improving things that have needed improvement for over 20 years.
I mean, that's huge. It's absolutely not lost on me that one, your experience and being able to say, I actually feel comfortable speaking up And even if I am the only Black woman in the room, that's huge. And then when you take into consideration that you're representing a medical institution where there's a long history of medical distrust as well as inequity within the medical field, that also takes lives, right? We're actually going to be talking about that in our next town hall. Quick little commercial. Our next town hall is happening on Wednesday, September 23rd. Same time, same place. So we're actually going to be focused on Black maternal health, vaccines, and medical distrust. So the fact that there's at least one institution that we can say is on our good list is huge, and that's phenomenal. I want to ask.
Hey, Brittany, can I piggyback on Adriene's comment real quick?
Absolutely.
One other thing I just wanted to chime in is that it is really important to amplify our Black employees' voices, and we do that often at Mills. But the other piece to this that I think is really important is for our white colleagues as allies, as effective allies. Black folks can't be your educator and your teacher on all things Black community. And there are so many resources, tools, videos, podcasts, books available for folks to do their own work. And that is a big push within our organization. When we talk about allyship, allyship is doing your own work. It is not relying on your colleague to constantly tell their stories, while important, and that's one element. But you can't go to that well too often. There's tons of resources for folks to do their own research and to go on their own ally journey to understand what we've been dealing with when we talk about systemic injustice and racial injustice. So again, I just want to balance that we've got to push our white colleagues to have these conversations amongst themselves with their families. It's not bring the Black friend to dinner. It's how do you have these conversations within your own family unit? And that's a big part of what we push our employees to do. Because again, it can't just solely be our responsibility to bring everybody along on this journey.
Yeah.
And let me just remind
I totally agree.
James, let me jump in there too. I think that's a good point. But it reminds me of what Jesse was saying about remaining and retaining our own voice and our own truth. And the example I give is that if James and I are having a conversation, whatever it is, if it's about Malcolm, about Martin, it's about Marxism or capitalism, we have to develop the courage to keep the conversation we started with going when white friends show up. And so in history, we all know that we've operated with this duality, this double-mindedness, where we'd be talking, and then as soon as Karen or somebody shows up, we change our tone, our conversation, because we accommodate what we feel is the threat or the pressure or the inability to understand our point of view. So we switch. We're bilingual. We go from being our regular North Minneapolis Black selves, or Plymouth Avenue, or Plymouth Community, or Maplewood in-home selves, to a corporate self that is less authentic, I believe. The point now is that we have to have the courage to keep our conversation going between us and to speak our truth to us, but to everybody else as well, to not change. I think we're at a point of an awesome opportunity in the country and in the world. When I worked at General Mills years and years ago, one of the things that I noticed was that my white guys that I worked with and around and for, not only did they do their jobs, but all of them had nephews, nieces, cousins, uncles who had businesses. And those businesses were supplying General Mills with all kinds of trinkets, goods, and services, et cetera. And so I take from that this suggestion and this challenge to Blacks in the corporate arena. Why don't you use your space, your access, and your power to also open the gates up to make sure that you are directing to the degree that's, that is feasible, directing access to businesses in the Black community or communities of color. Now, a lot of companies are doing that, but more can be done. The second thing is that why don't you all see yourselves as entrepreneurs? You do great jobs, great work for your company. I wish that every person in a corporate environment also had one or two businesses of her own or his own that he or she managed as they did their wonderful and important work for the corporate community. So how do we begin to encourage the sense of entrepreneurship, the sense of ownership, the sense of sovereignty in our community, the sense of stakeholdership that allows us and reflects our belief that our solutions are going to come from us, and that solving problems is really the core mission of business. And we have to see all of our problems as our business. I have said often, too often, we get the misery, they get the money. They farm misery in our community. We have to change that equation, and we have to take ownership of being participants in and beneficiaries, both of the solution that comes at the end of work, but also of the mechanism that leads to that solution. Think of Mayo Clinic, looking at what it takes to solve cancer, but it's a 100-year process and a $1 trillion venture. And think of all the jobs and the mobilization of people and material and ideas and policy. We need to cultivate that same attitude and capability within us and tell the world and tell ourselves that this is our mission, our obligation, our duty, and then make it happen.
You know, you bring up an excellent point about we invest millions, trillions into cancer research. We don't have a solution yet, but we know the problem is there, and we know that it's taking lives every single day, every single moment, and it's a problem. And so corporations have made commitments into raising awareness and or finding a cure, regardless of how long it takes. So why isn't that same energy then put into issues when it's about race? And I think the bottom line a lot of times is the barrier of people saying, oh, well, we can't assemble an equity and inclusion team. We don't have money for it. We're in the middle of COVID and we just lost a lot of money. So we have to be careful with our finances right now. And it's important to us, but we just can't prioritize it financially because we can't afford it. And so I want to ask Marnita, who does this work and who gets a lot of phone calls from corporations, how do you communicate the need for corporations to make the investment? Because what we're seeing right now, even in our government, Diane Venters, one of our watchers, asked the question, the president is, I guess, trying to eliminate diversity and inclusion training within the federal government. You know, so this is from the top down. This is at the top of our nation. People are somehow rationalizing that because of COVID or because of our other financial priorities, that this thing doesn't need to be invested in. What is your response to that?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things to really know, going back to what James had to say about doing your own homework. So if you haven't read the book and you're a white person, go read the book, White Rage. And White Rage for me, somebody said, have you read White Fragility? I recommended that they read White Rage, and they immediately came back and said, have you read White Fragility? And I said, for me, that's just Tuesday. You know, because I'm in rooms all the time where, you know, if I talk about history, literally just basic history of redlining or some of those things, that it makes people really uncomfortable. So what I'm more concerned about is that there have been certain kinds of investment, and it stays cordoned off behind a wall called diversity and inclusion, right? But it doesn't actually, it's not attached to the entire strategic plan. And so you look at say a major retailer, we have several in this community, and go look at where their loss prevention test stores are. This was something, I have a 26-year-old Black son who said, Mom, if you're going to do corporate work, they can no longer just be talking about mentoring and things. They have to be addressing things like, where are they putting their loss prevention stores? And it turns out most major retailers put them in the middle of the inner city. And it's not like there's fewer shoplifters. It's been proven that people shoplift of all colors. They could choose to put them in white suburbs, right? And to test their security guards in the white suburbs, where mostly the kids would get a slap on the hand or something, right? And so to really look at what it means, first of all, to do equity work. What does equity look like? And to have it beyond a brochure with multicultural cute kids, one with dreadlocks, one with curls, one who's indeterminate in their culture, and a nice little blonde white kid, right? Like, other than using it as paint or front, the fact is, under the age of 18 right now in the United States, 1/2 of the population is now of color, under the age of 18. We went all over the state for the Department of Employment and DEED with Shantara Hardy, who I know I'm sure you know. And we went to rural areas and talked about equity in the workforce. And at first, everybody thought we were doing it as a charitable thing. And we tried to figure out, how do we embody and show them how important this is without putting Black and brown lives, like having to have us tell sob stories to make people think we are human. Like, I don't want to have to tell what you did to me for you to see me as human. And we started a very simple thing. First, we make everybody stand in their generational groups. And Mankato, Rochester, Worthington, Wilmer, Bemidji, Duluth. We made them all stand in their generational groups. And the old white people all gasped. Even in these rural communities, more than half of the people who were millennials and Gen Z were Black and brown. And the baby boomers and the Gen Xers were largely white. And it was they gasped. It was like they suddenly saw, oh, we're not going to have taxes or roads or dentists. We're not going to have essential needs. And so our argument is, if you are not able to lead and sell and work with a diverse, multi-generational, multicultural team, you are no longer qualified to be a professional in the workforce. That is just a basic competency. And I think it used to be thought of as a nice to have, and now you're just not going to have clients or customers. You know, General Mills is probably not going to hire a major consulting firm anymore that's 98% white, because they don't want a vendor anymore that's 98% white, right? Like, people are starting to pay more attention. And I call it, do you only shop at one aisle of the grocery store? Why are we shopping? Why are we only listening to white men, right? Like, there is so, brilliant ideas coming out of other people. And so that was it. And so what we've done, so people have, it's not so much the corporations that call us, it's everyday people, Brittany. Like, people call us Jesse's been to my table, right? They call us and they say, Marnita, we want you to do a table. So we've started a series called Safer. And it's not an acronym, it's literally Safer. And it's because what a white person might believe makes them safer in their neighborhoods is very different than what I think makes me safer in my neighborhood. And the first thing that communities of color, particularly around 38th and 39th in Chicago, asked for was our series called Healing from Trauma. They needed to come together and learn some tools and techniques so that they could heal, so they could just be whole. We watched snuff films all this spring of young men. Elijah McClain. I have a son named Elijah McGregor. What do you think I felt when I watched that 23-year-old boy who played violins for cats being killed, right? Like, why was that white person? Why were they suspicious? And so, by the way, I was profiled at the north end of Lake of the Isles last October. 2 white people called the police, said I was violent, dangerous, and out of control with vicious dogs. And 2 police officers pulled up on me with hands on weapons, got out of their car. I stepped forward. I said, I'm Marnita. Hi, I'm Marnita. How may I help you? And the older woman cop said, wait, Marnita of Marnita's table? And you could see in her eyes, she was like signaling to the other cop who still had his hand on his weapon. She was like, we do not want any piece of this.
The wrong one.
It's like, we do not want to kill this woman. Like, this would be you could see her thinking that, like, although I have to say, they offered to take me back to the dog park and to stay with me because they felt that I had been transgressed against. Mm-hmm. But it was a really interesting moment. So
that's a great point though, because you're Marnita, right? So when people figure out who you are, it's like, oh, we've messed with the wrong one. We need to fix our posture. We need to make sure that we have a positive interaction with this person because she's got a large network, a large following. She does a lot in the community. She's very loved. She's very respected. People will raise hell if there's a problem. But what happens when you're not the Marnita?
If it was my 26-year-old black son.
Exactly.
With my dogs. And I still have nightmares about it.
And, you know, that's a part of the question of like, okay, we're in this moment. What is it going to take for people to start seeing our humanity? Because you shouldn't have to pull out your resume for them to know how valuable you are. And that people would absolutely raise hell if anything happened to you. And that you are deserving and worthy of love and respect and to be protected and served, which is the job of law enforcement, right? And so it makes me think about what is it going to take for our humanity to be fully recognized? Because the saying Black Lives Matter, a comedian joked, that's the minimum. It's a perfectly matter. Like, how about Black lives are sacred? They should be respected. They should be fairly compensated. Like, these are basic requirements that we're asking, and it boils down to them simply not seeing our humanity. And so I want to ask Jesse, what does it take? What do you think it's going to take for Black men specifically to not be seen as dangerous, to not be seen as a threat, and for people to be able to look at you or to look at Elijah, Marnita's son, who's also phenomenal, right? And to say, wow, that's the type of person I want in my company versus let me have them escorted off of the premises. What is it going to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'll be honest, I don't know if I have a very eloquent way of saying it, but I'll say what first came to mind, right? I think the first thing it takes is for us, like us on this group, us watching this, to be able to say, you know what, we are one, I got your back. And if somebody does anything to you, and whoever it is, I'm going to raise hell. And so the part of that transparency for me has always been, if you're part of, if I'm around, it's not even just, it used to be like, oh, if you're part of my family, you know, we protect our own or whatever. If you are in the vicinity, the vow I have made is, and I understand that the sacrifice that comes with it, if I'm watching, if I am near and I can actually do something about it, I'm going to stand up. Now, I understand that puts me at risk also, but I know what that feeling is like to be alone and to feel like nobody's watching. And so whether it is Marnita, whether it's Adrienne, if it's James, if there's other people, there's a young cat that I'm able to see, it's really having the unity that our culture was built on and saying, you know what, I got you. And okay, that happened to you. All right, let's make sure you're safe. Let's make sure that we can, you know, take care of you and get you wherever you need to go. But then the follow-up, because that's what we don't do well. We're very emotional. We can be emotional in the moment, but we got to have a plan as well. And so I think we should raise hell in all aspects so that everybody knows it's not just Black women. It's not just Black men. It's not just young Black men. Like, we're going to raise hell no matter what it takes to make sure that you understand that we are together, which is a whole broader aspect, but then also those relationships that we have. So James can talk the General Mills culture and the language different than I can because he's on the inside. And so now James and I develop a relationship, right? We develop relationships to be able to say, hey, here was my experience. And then we be able to translate that back to, well, you know, you and I have never had a problem, but you and that person or this person and that person, we got to address this because it could happen to anybody. And so I think part of that, those relationships have to be established, but we also have to have that. And maybe I'm just way too radical, but I just have that feeling of like, it's not just, you know, again, I was born in Mississippi. And so if I got in trouble, if I got in trouble and it was my friends, I just didn't get whooped. Everybody in the house got whooped. Just because of what, you know, because it was like, yo, we're all together. And so I come from we're responsible for each other. And so I think part of that is if we can continue to instill that and display that, because that's a whole nother aspect that sometimes we get in these situations and we have been, Al talked about it a lot. Like we've been trained to code switch. We've been trained to adjust and to kind of oust each other. So let's get back to the unity piece, but then also the relationships and the leverage that we have to be able to say, you know what, you might have felt this way, there's a different way about doing it. There's a, I'm going to tell a quick story randomly because there, I run, first of all, I used to say I'm not a runner. I'm still not a runner, but I run for exercise now. And I used to, probably about a year ago, I used to do it. I live on the north side, Laurie and Sheridan. And so I would run pretty much in my neighborhood. Now I run about 3 or 4 in the morning, where most people would be like, that's not a good time to run. But in my neighborhood, where I have like the relationships and the connections, I love it. It's peaceful. I mean, and there's a couple people outside, but they know me, right? I would never do that in a community that I don't feel I belong to. So everything happened with the civil unrest, and I posted something on social media about, man, not being able to run or not feeling safe. Of course, Elijah McClain happened, and that really psychologically did something to me. I had at the time, he wasn't even a friend, but a white guy said, you know what, I'll run with you at 4 a.m. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't know about that. And so waited a couple weeks, right? And then went to his neighborhood in St. Louis Park. Now, in my hood, it's light. I got street lights. I got cars. So if something happens, somebody's going to see it. I'm running in St. Louis Park, and it's pitch black. And I just flat out told him, I was like, I would never run out here. Mm-mm. And so what he did, he listened. He didn't, necessarily ask why, but because he understood. We run now every Wednesday at 4:00 in on West Broadway, right in the middle of where it typically what people would say, like, this is a problem neighborhood. And not only am I am the only black dude running, so this is a call for everybody else. But there are this morning, we have 14 white folks who are not from the neighborhood to be able to come and show up. Why? Not just because they like to run, but from relationships. To be able to say, you know what? I know somebody now, and so the way that I view this community, the way that I view these people, the way that I view this world is a little bit different because of relationships. And so I just use that a lot as of saying, that's not gonna be the end all be all to fix the problem, but I think it's a start to be able to say, you know what, we got each other's back. We're gonna raise hell if anything happens to anybody, and we leverage our relationships so that hopefully we can continue to spread the word and then change a person one by one.
Absolutely. Alicia Steele, who's a local artist here in the Twin Cities community, always says the revolution is a relationship. And I've taken that to heart 1000%. It's the model that Marnita's business is built off of, the intentional social interaction that matters. And I'm really hoping that corporations and the individuals who run corporations and the individuals who are a part of it can continue to see one another and not pass judgment based on physical appearance or based on other sets of circumstances that disproportionately disenfranchise people. So when we talk about corporate responsibility, what is your dress code? What is the culture of your work environment? Do you hire felons? One of the biggest questions that I have for all of these organizations who put out mission statements that were revised or put out emails saying, we stand with Black lives and we don't support police brutality and all of those things. How many of those corporations would have actually hired George Floyd had he been alive to tell about his story? George Floyd had a record. It didn't mean he deserved to die. And what the police were called for, we're still not even sure that actually even happened. But if a corporation isn't willing to look at the fact that historically Black people have been criminalized, that the police were a subset of slave catchers, that entire policing culture came from catching escaped people leaving enslavement, and to say perhaps a lot of the people who have felonies on their records are still good people whose lives also matter, who also deserve to make an equitable wage and to be hired. These are the questions that we have to be asking the corporations that we're a part of and that we choose to work with, is even if I was not the bright and shiny star that the community believes that I am, even if I wasn't as well known as I am, would you still see my value? Would you actually still see me? And until we can have that question answered, because it's great to have the exceptional Black person or the Black person who can code switch. But when Marnita brought up loss prevention, that I think about the Target that was burned down and looted across the street from the 3rd precinct. George Floyd was killed 3 blocks from my grandmother's house. My cousin, who grew up in that house, said, although I don't agree with it, I'm glad they did what they did because I've lived in this neighborhood my entire life and they wouldn't hire me because I was a felon. These are the lived experiences of people who are in community. And so when we see corporations responding and saying that they stand with Black lives, we have to actually have that as an experience. And so I know we're running out of time. I want to ask James in closing, where do we go from here? How do we make it a real experience? And how do we, especially because most of us are not on the inside, right? How do we hold these corporations accountable to actually, in practice, saying that they value Black lives?
Yeah, I think accountability is important. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. This has been really enlightening, and I think a lot of the insights, I learned a lot from this. So I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of it. I think accountability is really important, and frankly, it starts with folks inside these organizations holding their own leaders accountable for progress and doing what you said you were going to do. So I think that's number one, is folks like myself, other leaders of color in these organizations. We've got to continue to be the voice that advocates on behalf of our communities and our people to make sure that the company's doing what it says it's going to do. I think the second part is the community's got to hold the corporations accountable as well. When we make public statements, I expect the community to hold us accountable and to be a check on the statements that we make. We talked earlier about organizations making statements that are just symbolic gestures and don't have the substance behind them. And ultimately, I think our consumers will hold us accountable for what we say and do we mean it. Again, journals, we don't make statements that we don't back up, which is why we take a long time to make statements, because we're really thoughtful about delivering on what we say we're going to do. And I think every consumer, that's our power, is when you're talking about corporations, ultimately, especially consumer packaged goods companies, our consumers hold us accountable. And so, again, I take that oath really seriously, that relationship with our consumers really seriously. So we're not going to say something that frankly we can't deliver on. And I think that's ultimately where accountability lies, is our communities and our consumers holding these corporations accountable for what they say.
Absolutely. Adrienne, do you have any closing remarks?
Just for the corporations that may be listening, keep in mind that especially for the corporations that have essential workers, be it food services or healthcare, Black people are 11% higher rates of employment for essential workers. And so in addition to being impacted by COVID disease and death at a higher rate, they are also impacted at a higher rate because they are essential workers. And so they will have a higher rate of distress related to the civil unrest and the disease and the death and the inability to have daycare and children having to have distance and or hybrid learning. And so all of these things are going to impact your employees a little bit more because we are the highest rate of employees in essential worker corporations. And so if they need assistance with how to help their employees of color, they need to reach out. There are people who can help them, at least guide them in the direction they should be going in terms of what to do to support those employees. But there are resources out there. There are people out there. I am volunteering Marnita because she's wonderful. Even though we just met, I think she'll be a great resource to help a lot of these corporations figure out what they need to do and how to do it to support their employees of color during the pandemic, civil unrest, murderous hornet situation that we're having to deal with right now.
Absolutely. MarnitasTable.org or MrJessieRoss.com. Both of our remaining panelists do this work and have been doing this work, not just in response to the murder of George Floyd, but because they've committed their lives to actual diversity, equity, and inclusion. So panelists, I want to thank you all so much for your time and for being here. I want to thank all of the people who were asking questions in the chat and who are viewing at home. And I want to invite you to come back to our next conversation, which is going to be happening 2 weeks from now. It's Wednesday, the 23rd. And that conversation is on Black maternal health, vaccines, and medical distrust within the community. Marnita also put her email in the chat, marnita@marnitastable.org. I also want to remind people, of course, this conversation started out and is going to close talking about COVID-19. And so if in fact you do want to get tested or need to get tested, there are a few locations that are providing COVID-19 testing for free. You can get a COVID test as well as a flu shot happening Friday and Saturday, the 11th and 12th from 12 to 4 p.m. at Shiloh Temple. That's 1201 West Broadway Avenue in North Minneapolis. They've got drive-up and walk-up testing available. It looks like you do not need an appointment, but if you have questions, you can contact Shiloh Temple at 612-302-1463. There's also free COVID-19 testing happening on Saturday, September 19th, as well as Saturday, September 26th, from 12 to 5 at the Islamic Center in South Minneapolis. It's open to everyone. You can register on site. There are Somali translators available. And if you need other accommodations, you can call either 311 or 612-673-3000. Last but certainly not least, if you're in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, you can go to the Brian Coyle Neighborhood Community Center, and they've got COVID-19 testing starting on September 11th. That's this Friday from 1 to 4 p.m. That address is 420 South 15th Avenue in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And the information is also going to be in the comments, so make sure you check it out. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Mr. McFarland, who had to drop off a little bit earlier. My name is Brittany L. Wright. I'm also representing Insight News, and it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
It was an honor.
Thank you.